All right, hello, my lovely grade 11s. How are you? Mr. K here. Look, still in the classroom. Another screencast video just failed, so we have to do it this way on the phone, and I think we have to do it this way forever. So that sucks. So, which notes am I looking at and I'm going to be talking about? If you can see here, it is the Unit D evolution notes. I'm just continuing on talking about those so you can follow along with those. So I'm gonna put you again, I think, over here on my handy little phone holder. And I wish there was a way to show this to you better, but there isn't. I don't know why the screencasting continues to fail. So remember we talked about vestigial structures, we talked about Jean Lamarck, we talked about Darwin. Interestingly enough, last night I read that there's been a discovery was made, it doesn't disparage Darwin or anything like that, but Islamic scholars, I forget his name, great. The Islamic scholar, about 100 years before Darwin, was already talking about evolution. Well, you're talking about inheritance, how organisms inherit traits, and how the fittest are the ones that survive. Just an example why I don't like to teach the history stuff, because it's very Anglo-centric, I guess. So anyways, but it's a good way to learn the actual concepts, because we kind of learn them through Darwin. So anyways, Darwin, remember he talked about natural selection, that there are more offspring that can survive. The offspring with better adaptations, better traits are the ones that live, and then they are able to reproduce and produce their offspring, and as a result, those adaptations and traits survive, and bad adaptations don't survive. Or adaptations that aren't as good don't survive or produce as many offspring. So we're going to continue on to that. There's lots of stuff in this unit. This video hopefully is just going to be short. It's just going to finish this page of notes. Then there are many more pages of notes. And I'll be putting out those videos. I'll make more tonight. So tomorrow you probably will have a whole bunch of stuff to watch that I will post. Okay, so I don't know if you can see behind me, it says genome. And so evolution by natural selection in a nutshell, that's the last thing we covered in the last video. So genome, let's talk about what a genome is. So a genome is all your genetic material. It's all the genes that you carry. It's all the information that your DNA carries. Remember Darwin, Lamarck, they did not know about DNA. Either did these Islamic scholars. They didn't know how stuff was passed on, how it was inherited. They just knew that it was. So genes, let's define what a gene is. So a gene, I have the blackboard here. A gene, back to the blackboard. A gene is basically, it just codes for one protein or enzyme. It's the sequence of DNA that codes for a protein or an enzyme. And remember, we are made of proteins and enzymes. All the processes that happen in our body are managed or catalyzed or run by enzymes. So you can have more efficient, you can have better enzymes, you can have worse enzymes, you can have more efficient or less efficient, because that sequence of amino acids that comes together to form the enzyme can be slightly different, because there can be variations in the DNA. You see how that works? The DNA codes for the amino acids, which then fold themselves into the enzyme or the protein and do what they do. So, and genes can be inherited because we pass on our DNA to our offspring. So these are sections of DNA responsible for controlling the production of a particular protein or enzyme. Now, these variations in genes, so I said an enzyme can be more efficient or less efficient. So there could be two types of this enzyme, depending on, there's the different sequence of amino acids. But the enzyme is still mostly the same, and maybe just 2 or 3 amino acids are different. And maybe those 2 or 3 amino acids make the enzyme more efficient. Now, the genes for those 2 enzymes, the DNA sequence, is going to be slightly different. It's going to be slightly different. One is going to code for 2 or 3 different amino acids. Those 2 sequences, those 2 genes, those variations in genes are called alleles. And this is a very important word, is allele. You need to know what an allele is, and that's a variation in the gene. Okay? So I'll give you another example. I have brown eyes. So the protein in my iris, in my eyes, that makes my eyes brown, reflects, all other light and whatever, or absorbs all other light, reflects brown. It's dependent on the shape of the protein. I don't exactly know how eye color works, but we're going to use this as an example. So I have the gene for eye color. My gene for eye color is the brown gene. It makes the protein that makes my eyes look brown. My wife, for example, her eyes are blue. So she has the protein that reflects or absorbs all other colors, but reflects blue. Okay? So they're the same gene. They're the gene for eye color, but they're two different alleles. One allele codes for brown, one allele codes for blue. Now, we all carry different alleles of genes in our bodies because we get half our DNA from our mom and half our DNA from our dad. Remember, we did that brief thing up here. It was very fast. We talked about meiosis, and at the end of meiosis, all the DNA all the DNA got passed on. At the end, only half of it made it across. Well, what the half is, only half the alleles make it across. It's still all the DNA. It's still all the information, but it's only half the alleles that make it into your sperm and make it into your eggs if you're a girl. It's just half. And they're randomly selected which alleles come. So it all gets mixed up. Different sperm have different alleles. So the example of that is, so one of my daughters has blue eyes. She received half her DNA from me, half her DNA from mama. So half her alleles are from me, half her alleles are from her mom. Now I have brown eyes. So I must carry the allele for blue eyes though, because blue eyes are what's called recessive. So some of my sperm must have had that allele from whichever of my parents that was blue-eyed. And my wife is all blue-eyed, so she only carries the allele for blue eyes. She doesn't carry the allele for brown eyes, because if she did, she would have brown eyes. So when my wife's sperm and my wife's egg and my sperm met, my sperm was carrying only the allele for blue eyes. My wife was carrying a allele for blue eyes. They came together. My daughter has blue eyes. My other daughter, my second daughter, the bad one, she's not the bad one, but she's the cute one, but the mischievous one. She got my brown allele because her eyes are brown. So she's still got the blue allele from her mom, but the brown allele is the dominant allele. So she has brown eyes. See how that works? So alleles are the same gene, but a variation. It's a variation of a gene. So this is very important. Now, let me get back here. So we talked about genes. Now, gene pool is all the different alleles in a population that the whole population carries, everybody in the population. So that population, the size of that population, you can determine arbitrarily. So in my family, my little family of 4 people, we carry our gene pool carries the alleles for brown eyes and the alleles for blue eyes. If you look at just my wife and my daughter, my first daughter, their gene pool only carries the alleles for blue eyes. Okay? But usually when we talk about populations, we talk about bigger. So we talk about like North America, or let's say we talk about wolves living in North America. All the DNA, all the different genes and all the different alleles that those wolves carry, that's the gene pool of wolves in North America. And the more variation in a gene pool, the better for a population, because if all of a sudden a environmental disaster or environmental pressure comes along, if you have more genes, more different alleles, you have more ways that you can adapt, you have more options of alleles that can become beneficial to whatever the environmental pressure is. So, if we keep going with eyes, with blue eyes, and brown eyes, let's say, are more resistant to ultraviolet light. Say, I don't know, this would be totally crazy, but the sun, something happens to the sun, and it starts putting out more ultraviolet light. So people with brown eyes are less likely to get cataracts and get cancer. I don't know if this is any true. I'm making this up. Then our species would survive because we wouldn't go blind. Our species would survive. The brown-eyed folks would survive. The blue-eyed folks, they would have less opportunity to pass on their genes. Humans is a bad example. I mean, if we use wolves to say blue-eyed wolves and brown-eyed wolves, I have no idea if they're blue-eyed or brown-eyed. So the blind wolves wouldn't be able to hunt, wouldn't be able to have offspring then. So the brown-eyed wolves would pass on. If all the wolves, if their gene pool got limited, of all the wolves in North America had just blue eyes, you see how that would be bad, because all of a sudden there's this thing where they need brown eyes. The brown eyes aren't there. So it's good to have big variation in a gene pool. That's why Noah's Ark kind of wouldn't work, because there's such a small gene pool. Not to pick on that, but it always irks me, because it would be such a small gene pool of everybody that made it onto the thing. But maybe there was some kind of magic or something. Who knows? I'm not going to argue about that stuff. So that's gene pool. There's a picture here of the frogs. So their gene pool includes all the different colors. And next, let's quickly talk about adaptation. So what's an adaptation? Adaptation is it's a feature of an organism that helps it survive. And so this can be based on just one gene or a series of genes that contribute to a feature and attribute of the organism that helps it survive. So humans have the adaptation of huge, massive, problem-solving brain. That's our adaptation that helps us survive. Birds have wings, sharp claws. All these things are an adaptation that potentially allow an organism to survive, and there can be variation in that adaptation, so some members survive better than others. What does species mean? So species is the next thing in these notes. So species is just individuals that can interbreed with each other, so they can get it on and produce viable offspring. So for example, a horse and a donkey can get it on, and they can actually produce offspring. They can produce a ginny, a finny, a ninny, I don't remember, but also a mule. They can produce a mule. But they're not members of the same species, because mules and finnies, or whatever they are, they can't produce offspring themselves. They're sterile. So in order to be members of a species, in order to get that thing at the end of the whole taxonomy thing, you need to be able to interbreed and produce species that can have offspring. Who came up with donkeys and horses and all that stuff? Which farmer? Come on. Yeah, weirdos. Speciation. So we're going to be talking about speciation way more in the notes to come, but just a quick preview. Basically, speciation is when one species turns into two. It speciates. And there can be different reasons for that. Usually the most common is, you've got a population of frogs. Let's say you use frogs, and then the river splits, and so some frogs go over here and some frogs go over here. Now they're geographically far apart from each other. And so now, instead of one population of frogs, there's two populations of frogs. They're still the same species of frogs, but they are geographically isolated from each other, which means they're not breeding with each other. They're just breeding with themselves. And on one river, there's a predator there that comes along and is hunting frogs that are red, the colorful frogs. So all the frogs start, there's some green frogs and some red frogs in these populations, but then the red frogs can't camouflage against the leaves. So in one of the populations of frogs, they're all green. The other one, they're still red and green. And over time, they breed. There's other selective pressures. As time goes on, generations go on, there's different selective pressures on those two populations. So the adaptations that are selected will be different. And eventually, after a long time, what you'll have two different species of frog that can't breed with each other anymore. They can't. Maybe there could be different reasons why they can't breed, but but their morphology, so their shape and stuff might have changed. Maybe they needed to be larger in one, they adapted to be larger, or they adapted to be smaller in one place. All kinds of, or they just don't like orange frogs. The green frogs don't like orange frogs. It could be something even simple as that. Okay, so that's speciation. Okay, so I think that does it for this, the end of the notes here. So we finished off this page. And I'll just continue pumping out. There's a lot of pages. I told you this unit is huge. It's kind of too bad that we're not doing a quiz in this unit. I'd like to quiz you in this unit, but instead you've got that giant assignment. I'm going to do a video also on what to do in that assignment. I'm going to do that shortly. Okay, cheers.